Chapter 17. Young Rupert's Midnight Diversions. The night came fine and clear. I had prayed for dirty weather, such as had favoured my previous voyage in the moat, but fortune was this time against me. Still, I reckoned that by keeping close under the wall and in the shadow, I could escape detection from the windows of the chateau that looked out over the scene of my efforts. If they searched the moat, indeed, my scheme must fail, but I did not think they would. They had made Jacob's ladder secure against attack. Johann had himself helped to fix it closely to the masonry on the underside, so that it could not now be moved from below any more than from above. An assault with explosives or a long battering with picks alone could displace it, and the noise involved in either of those operations put them out of the question. What harm, then, could a man do in the moat? I trusted that Black Michael, putting this query to himself, would answer confidently, "None," while, even if Johann meant treachery, he did not know my scheme, and would doubtless expect to see me at the head of my friends before the front entrance to the chateau. There, I said to Sapt, was the real danger. And there, I added, you shall be. Doesn't that content you? But it did not. Dearly would he have liked to come with me, had I not utterly refused to take him. One man might escape notice; to double the party more than doubled the risk; and when he ventured to hint once again that my life was too valuable, I, knowing the secret thought he clung to, sternly bade him to be silent, assuring him that unless the King lived through the night, I would not live through it either. At 12 o'clock, Sapt's command left the chateau of Tarlenheim and struck off to the right, riding by unfrequented roads and avoiding the town of Zenda. If all went well, they would be in front of the castle by about 1:45. Leaving their horses half a mile off, they were to steal up to the entrance and hold themselves in readiness for the opening of the door. If the door were not opened by 2, they were to send Fritz von Tarlenheim round to the other side of the castle. I would meet him there, if I were alive, and we would consult whether to storm the castle or not. If I were not there, they were to return with all speed to Tarlenheim, rouse the Marshal, and march in force to Zenda. For if not there, I should be dead, and I knew that the King would not be alive 5 minutes after I had ceased to breathe. I must now leave Sapt and his friends, and relate how I myself proceeded on this eventful night. I went out on the good horse that had carried me, on the night of the coronation, back from the hunting lodge to Strelsau. I carried a revolver in the saddle and my sword. I was covered with a large cloak, and under this I wore a warm, tight-fitting woollen jersey, pair of knickerbockers, thick stockings, and light canvas shoes. I had rubbed myself thoroughly with oil, and I carried a large flask of whisky. The night was warm, but I might probably be immersed a long while, and it was necessary to take every precaution against cold, for cold not only saps a man's courage if he has to die, but impairs his energy if others have to die, and finally gives him rheumatics if it be God's will that he lives. Also I tied round my body a length of thin but stout cord, and I did not forget my ladder. I, starting after Sapt, took a shorter route, skirting the town to the left, and found myself in the outskirts of the forest at about 12:30. I tied my horse up in a thick clump of trees, leaving the revolver in its pocket in the saddle. It would be no use to me, and, ladder in hand, made my way to the edge of the moat. Here I unwound my rope from about my waist, bound it securely round the trunk of a tree on the bank, and let myself down. The castle clock struck 1:45 as I felt the water under me, and began to swim round the keep, pushing the ladder before me and hugging the castle wall. Thus voyaging, I came to my old friend Jacob's ladder, and felt the ledge of the masonry under me. I crouched down in the shadow of the great pipe. I tried to stir it, but it was quite immovable, and waited. I remember that my predominant feeling was neither anxiety for the King nor longing for Flavia, but an intense desire to smoke, and this craving, of course, I could not gratify. The drawbridge was still in its place. I saw its airy, slight framework above me, some 10 yards to my right, as I crouched with my back against the wall of the King's cell. I made out a window, 2 yards my side of it, and nearly on the same level. That, if Johann spoke true, must belong to the Duke's apartments; and on the other side, in about the same relative position, must be Madame de Mauban's window. Women are careless, forgetful creatures. I prayed that she might not forget that she was to be the victim of a brutal attempt at 2 o'clock precisely. I was rather amused at the part I had assigned to my young friend Rupert Hentzau, but I owed him a stroke, for even as I sat, my shoulder ached where he had, with an audacity that seemed half to hide his treachery, struck at me, in the sight of all my friends on the terrace at Tarlenheim. Suddenly the Duke's window grew bright. The shutters were not closed, and the interior became partially visible to me, as I cautiously raised myself till I stood on tiptoe. Thus placed, my range of sight embraced 1 yard or more inside the window, while the radius of light did not reach me. The window was flung open, and some one looked out. I marked Antoinette de Mauban's graceful figure, and though her face was in shadow, the fine outline of her head was revealed against the light behind. I longed to cry softly, "Remember!" but I dared not; and happily, for a moment later, a man came up and stood by her. He tried to put his arm round her waist, but with a swift motion she sprang away and leant against the shutter, her profile toward me. I made out who the newcomer was. It was young Rupert. A low laugh from him made me sure, as he leant forward, stretching out his hand toward her. "Gently, gently," I murmured. "You're too soon, my boy." His head was close to hers. I suppose he whispered to her, for I saw her point to the moat, and I heard her say in slow and distinct tones, "I had rather throw myself out of this window." He came up close to the window and looked out. "It looks cold," said he. "Come, Antoinette, are you serious?" She made no answer, as far as I heard, and he, smiting his hand petulantly on the window sill, went on in the voice of some spoilt child: "Hang Black Michael! Isn't the princess enough for him? Is he to have everything? What the devil do you see in Black Michael?" "If I told him what you say," she began. "Well, tell him," said Rupert carelessly, and catching her off her guard, he sprang forward and kissed her, laughing and crying, "There's something to tell him!" If I had kept my revolver with me, I should have been very sorely tempted. Being spared the temptation, I merely added this new score to his account. "Though, faith," said Rupert, "it's little he cares. He's mad about the princess, you know. He talks of nothing but cutting the play actor's throat." "Didn't he, indeed?" "And if I do it for him, what do you think he's promised me?" The unhappy woman raised her hands above her head, in prayer or in despair. "But I detest waiting," said Rupert, and I saw that he was about to lay his hand on her again, when there was the noise of a door in the room opening, and a harsh voice cried: "What are you doing here, sir?" Rupert turned his back to the window, bowed low, and said in his loud, merry tones: "Apologizing for your absence, sir. Could I leave the lady alone?" The newcomer must be Black Michael. I saw him directly as he advanced towards the window. He caught young Rupert by the arm. "The moat would hold more than the King," said he, with a significant gesture. "Does your Highness threaten me?" asked Rupert. "A threat is more warning than most men get from me." "Yet," observed Rupert, "Rudolf Rassendyll has been much threatened, and yet lives." "Am I in fault because my servants bungle?" asked Michael scornfully. "Your Highness has run no risk of bungling," sneered Rupert. It was telling the Duke that he shirked danger as plain as ever I have heard a man told. Black Michael had self-control. I dare say he scowled. It was a great regret to me that I could not see their faces better. But his voice was even and calm as he answered: "Enough, enough! We mustn't quarrel, Rupert. Are Detchard and Bersonin at their posts?" "They are, sir." "I need you no more." "Nay, I am not oppressed with fatigue," said Rupert. "Pray, sir, leave us," said Michael, more impatiently. "In 10 minutes the drawbridge will be drawn back, and I presume you have no wish to swim to your bed?" Rupert's figure disappeared. I heard the door open and shut again. Michael and Antoinette de Mauban were left together. To my chagrin, the Duke laid his hand on the window and closed it. He stood talking to Antoinette for a moment or two. She shook her head, and he turned impatiently away. She left the window. The door sounded again, and Black Michael closed the shutters. "Decoy, men!" sounded from the drawbridge. "Unless you want a bath before your bed, come along." It was Rupert's voice, coming from the end of the drawbridge. A moment later he and de Gautet stepped out on the bridge. Rupert's arm was through de Gautet's, and in the middle of the bridge he detained his companion and leant over. I dropped behind the shelter of Jacob's ladder. Then Master Rupert had a little sport. He took from de Gautet a bottle which he carried and put it to his lips. "Hardly a drop!" he cried discontentedly, and flung it in the moat. It fell, as I judged from the sound and the circles on the water, within a yard of the pipe, and Rupert, taking out his revolver, began to shoot at it. The first 2 shots missed the bottle, but hit the pipe. The third shattered the bottle. I hoped that the young ruffian would be content, but he emptied the other barrels at the pipe, and one, skimming over the pipe, whistled through my hair as I crouched on the other side. "Where bridge?" a voice cried, to my relief. Rupert and de Gautet cried, "A moment!" and ran across. The bridge was drawn back, and all became still. The clock struck 1:15. I rose and stretched myself and yawned. I think some 10 minutes had passed when I heard a slight noise to my right. I peered over the pipe and saw a dark figure standing in the gateway that led to the bridge. It was a man. By the careless, graceful poise, I guessed it to be Rupert again. He held a sword in his hand, and he stood motionless for a minute or two. Wild thoughts ran through me. On what mischief was the young fiend bent now? Then he laughed low to himself. Then he turned his face to the wall, took a step in my direction, and, to my surprise, began to climb down the wall. In an instant I saw that there must be steps in the wall. It was plain. They were cut into or affixed to the wall, at intervals of about 18 inches. Rupert set his foot on the lower one. Then he placed his sword between his teeth, turned round, and noiselessly let himself down into the water. Had it been a matter of my life only, I would have swum to meet him. Dearly would I have loved to fight it out with him then and there with steel on a fine night, and none to come between us. But there was the King. I restrained myself, but I could not bridle my swift breathing, and I watched him with the intentest eagerness. He swam leisurely and quietly across. There were more footsteps on the other side, and he climbed them. When he set foot in the gateway, standing on the drawn-back bridge, he felt in his pocket and took something out. I heard him unlock the door. I could hear no noise of it closing behind him. He vanished from my sight. Abandoning my ladder (I saw I did not need it now), I swam to the side of the bridge and climbed halfway up the steps. There I hung, with my sword in my hand, listening eagerly. The Duke's room was shuttered and dark. There was a light in the window on the opposite side of the bridge. Not a sound broke the silence till 1:30 chimed from the great clock in the tower of the chateau. There were other plots than mine afoot in the castle that night. Chapter 18. The Forcing of the Trap. The position wherein I stood does not appear very favourable to thought. Yet for the next moment or two I thought profoundly. I had, I told myself, scored 1 point. Be Rupert Hentzau's errand what it might, and the villainy he was engaged on be what it would, I had scored 1 point. He was on the other side of the moat from the King, and it would be by no fault of mine if ever he set foot on the same side again. I had 3 left to deal with: 2 on guard, and de Gautet in his bed. Ah, if I had the keys, I would have risked everything and attacked Detchard and Bersonin before their friends could join them. But I was powerless. I must wait till the coming of my friends enticed someone to cross the bridge, someone with keys. And I waited, as it seemed, for half an hour, really for about 5 minutes, before the next act in the rapid drama began. All was still on the other side. The Duke's room remained inscrutable behind its shutters. The light burnt steadily in Madame de Mauban's window. Then I heard the faintest sound. It came from behind the door which led to the drawbridge on the other side of the moat. It but just reached my ear, yet I could not be mistaken as to what it was. It was made by a key being turned very carefully and slowly. Who was turning it, and of what room was it the key? There leapt before my eyes the picture of young Rupert, with the key in one hand, his sword in the other, and an evil smile on his face. But I did not know what door it was, nor on which of his favourite pursuits young Rupert was spending the hours of that night. I was soon to be enlightened, for the next moment, before my friends could be near the chateau door, before Johann the keeper would have thought to nerve himself for his task, there was a sudden crash from the room with the lighted window. It sounded as though someone had flung down a lamp, and the window went dark and black. At the same instant a cry rang out, shrill in the night: "Help! Help! Michael, help!" and was followed by a shriek of utter terror. I was tingling in every nerve. I stood on the topmost step, clinging to the threshold of the gate with my right hand and holding my sword in my left. Suddenly I perceived that the gateway was broader than the bridge. There was a dark corner on the opposite side where a man could stand. I darted across and stood there. Thus placed, I commanded the path, and no man could pass between the chateau and the old castle till he had tried conclusions with me. There was another shriek. Then a door was flung open and clanged against the wall, and I heard the handle of a door savagely twisted. "Open the door! In God's name, what's the matter?" cried a voice, the voice of Black Michael himself. He was answered by the very words I had written in my letter: "Help, Michael! Hence thou!" A fierce oath rang out from the Duke, and with a loud thud he threw himself against the door. At the same moment I heard a window above my head open, and a voice cried, "What's the matter?" and I heard a man's hasty footsteps. I grasped my sword. If de Gautet came my way, the 6 would be less by one more. Then I heard the clash of crossed swords and a tramp of feet. And I cannot tell the thing so quickly as it all happened, for it all seemed to come at once. There was an angry cry from Madame's room, the cry of a wounded man. The window was flung open. Young Rupert stood there, sword in hand. He turned his back, and I saw his body go forward to the lunge. "Ah, Johann, there's one for you! Come on, Michael!" Johann was there, then, had come to the rescue of the Duke. How would he open the door for me? For I feared that Rupert had slain him. "Help!" cried the Duke's voice, faint and husky. I heard a step on the stairs above me, and I heard a stir down to my left in the direction of the King's cell. But before anything happened on my side of the moat, I saw 5 or 6 men round young Rupert in the embrasure of Madame's window. 3 or 4 times he lunged with incomparable dash and dexterity. For an instant they fell back, leaving a ring round him. He leapt on to the parapet of the window, laughing as he leapt and waving his sword in his hand. He was drunk with blood, and he laughed again wildly as he flung himself headlong into the moat. What became of him then, I did not see, for as he leapt, de Gautier's lean face looked out through the door by me, and without a second's hesitation I struck at him with all the strength God had given me, and he fell dead in the doorway without a word or a groan. I dropped on my knees by him. Where were the keys? I found myself muttering, "The keys, man, the keys!" as though he had been yet alive and could listen. And when I could not find them, God forgive me, I believe I struck a dead man's face. At last I had them. There were but 3. Seizing the largest, I felt the lock of the door that led to the cell. I fitted in the key. It was right. The lock turned. I drew the door close behind me and locked it as noiselessly as I could, putting the key in my pocket. I found myself at the top of a flight of steep stone stairs. An oil lamp burnt dimly in the bracket. I took it down and held it in my hand, and I stood and listened. "What in the devil can it be?" I heard a voice say. It came from behind a door that faced me at the bottom of the stairs, and another answered, "Shall we kill him?" I strained to hear the answer, and could have sobbed with relief when Detchard's voice came grating and cold. "Wait a bit. There'll be trouble if we strike too soon." There was a moment's silence. Then I heard the bolt of the door cautiously drawn back. Instantly I put out the light I held, replacing the lamp in its bracket. "It's dark. The lamp's out. Have you a light?" said the other voice, Bersonin's. No doubt they had a light, but they should not use it. It had come to the crisis now, and I rushed down the steps and flung myself against the door. Bersonin had unbolted it, and it gave way before me. The Belgian stood there, sword in hand, and Detchard was sitting on a couch at the side of the room. In astonishment at seeing me, Bersonin recoiled. Detchard jumped to his sword. I rushed madly at the Belgian. He gave way before me, and I drove him up against the wall. He was no swordsman, though he fought bravely, and in a moment he lay on the floor before me. I turned. Detchard was not there. Faithful to his orders, he had not risked a fight with me, but had rushed straight to the door of the King's room, opened it and slammed it behind him. Even now he was at his work inside, and surely he would have killed the King, and perhaps me also, had it not been for one devoted man who gave his life for the King. For when I forced the door, the sight I saw was this: the King stood in the corner of the room. Broken by his sickness, he could do nothing. His fettered hands moved uselessly up and down, and he was laughing horribly in half mad delirium. Detchard and the doctor were together in the middle of the room, and the doctor had flung himself on the murderer, pinning his hands to his sides for an instant. Then Detchard wrenched himself free from the feeble grip, and as I entered, drove his sword through the hapless man. Then he turned on me, crying, "At last!" We were sword to sword. By blessed chance, neither he nor Bersonin had been wearing their revolvers. I found them afterward, ready loaded, on the mantelpiece of the outer room. It was hard by the door, ready to their hands, but my sudden rush in had cut off access to them. Yes, we were man to man, and we began to fight, silently, sternly, and hard. Yet I remember little of it, save that the man was my match with the sword, nay, and more, for he knew more tricks than I, and that he forced me back against the bars that guarded the entrance to Jacob's ladder, and I saw a smile on his face, and he wounded me in the left arm. No glory do I take for that contest. I believe that the man would have mastered me and slain me, and then done his butcher's work, for he was the most skilful swordsman I have ever met. But even as he pressed me hard, the half-mad, wasted one creature in the corner leapt high in lunatic mirth, shrieking, "It's Cousin Rudolf! Cousin Rudolf! I'll help you, Cousin Rudolf!" And catching up a chair in his hands, he could but just lift it from the ground and hold it uselessly before him, he came towards us. Hope came to me. "Come on!" I cried. "Come on! Drive it against his legs!" Detchard replied with a savage thrust. He all but had me. Come on, man!" I cried. "Come and share the fun!" And the King laughed gleefully and came on, pushing his chair before him. With an oath, Detchard skipped back, and before I knew what he was doing, had turned his sword against the King. He made one fierce cut at the King, and the King, with a piteous cry, dropped where he stood. The stout ruffian turned to face me again, but his own hand had prepared his destruction, for in turning he trod in the pool of blood that flowed from the dead physician. He slipped, he fell. Like a dart I was upon him. I caught him by the throat, and before he could recover himself I drove my point through his neck, and with a stifled curse he fell across the body of his victim. Was the King dead? It was my first thought. I rushed to where he lay. Ay, it seemed as if he were dead, for he had a great gash across the forehead, and he lay still in a huddled heap on the floor. I dropped on my knees beside him, and leant my ear down to hear if he breathed. But before I could, there was a loud rattle from the outside. I knew the sound. The drawbridge was being pushed out. A moment later it rang home against the wall on my side of the moat. I should be caught in a trap, and the King with me, if he yet lived. He must take his chance, to live or die. I took my sword and passed into the outer room. Who was pushing the drawbridge out? My men? If so, all was well. My eye fell on the revolvers, and I seized one, and paused to listen in the doorway of the outer room. To listen, say I? Yes, and to get my breath. And I tore my shirt and twisted a strip of it round my bleeding arm, and stood listening again. I would have given the world to hear Sapt's voice, for I was faint, spent, and weary, and that wild cat Rupert Hentzau was yet at large in the Castle. Yet, because I could better defend the narrow door at the top of the stairs than the wider entrance to the room, I dragged myself up the steps and stood behind it, listening. What was the sound? Again a strange one for the place and the time. An easy, scornful, merry laugh, the laugh of young Rupert Hentzau. I could scarcely believe that a sane man would laugh. Yet the laugh told me that my men had not come, for they must have shot Rupert ere now if they had come. And the clock struck 2:30. My God, the door had not been opened! They had gone to the bank. They had not found me. They had gone by now back to Tarlenheim, with the news of the King's death and mine. Well, it would be true before they got there. Was not Rupert laughing in triumph? For a moment I sank unnerved against the door. Then I started up, alert again, for Rupert cried scornfully: "Well, the bridge is there. Come over it, and in God's name let's see Black Michael. Keep back, you curs! Michael, come and fight for her." If it were a three-cornered fight, I might yet bear my part. I turned the key in the door and looked out.